brand, some people can be quite cynical about brand, can't they? And actually I can be.
So why do you care so much about it then?
Well, for small businesses, because it's the way they make their mark on the world, isn't it? And also it's the way they confirm their values and the way they go about doing things, so they can not only do it repeatedly in the same way or in the same excellent way, but also in a way that is valuably different to their competitors. And without knowing a touch point as to how to do that, then, which is held in a brand, or in the way you articulate a brand.
Yeah, but do you think people get kind of confused by what a brand is? Like, is it a personal brand? Is it a business brand? Is it just a logo? I think over the years, many people have kind of perceived that, you know, their brand is just their logo.
Yes.
They don't realise it's something much bigger.
Yes. Yeah, and actually you can't help it being something bigger, because you may well put a logo on an organisation like a cafe or something like that, and discover that actually people associate that logo with the rubbish service that there is in that cafe, and therefore they build a reputation around that means people stop going there. You know, that brand becomes an example of how not to do things. I mean, you're right. There's this confusion that sometimes people think brand is the logo, and to an extent that's what it is visually, but it symbolises a whole load of other things. I mean, you know, the typical example is Apple. You know, and their brand is symbolised by packaging, by the quality of product, by the technology, and that is kind of held in a crucible in the Apple logo, isn't it? Yeah. You know, you studied it at university.
Well, I studied graphic design at university, and I suppose for me it's an element of consistency about making your point of difference clear, and always sort of looking back on what you're doing and saying, well, this is what we stand for, this is how we can communicate, this is how we cope with things in a difficult time, this is what we value.
And you've touched on a good point there, which is it isn't just about the external facing. It's not just about how you create a customer group, sell things, get margin. It's also about how you influence people within the organisation, because they see it from the inside. And if you're lucky and you've got your internal processes aligned with your brand, then you're going to have a far more effective organisation in delivering what you're promising in your brand. So it is both sides.
And also, if a business is coming together or changing, a brand will really help articulate how you do things around there, and how you cope with change, how you cope with difficulty. These are all things that your internal brand will help you with your staff and how it deals with the outside world.
Yeah, and that's another good point about changing. So often we're given briefs around a new brand or a rebrand, and one of the first questions we have to say is, well, what change are you symbolising? Because actually there's no point changing the way you present yourself to the outside world unless something has changed about the way you are delivering to the outside world, because otherwise it'll be a disappointment.
Which is always a bit of an interesting one from a designer standpoint, because there is this desire, perhaps as a designer, to want to change things, to make an impact on something. So a new client comes along and you're saying, well, actually, I want to have an impact here, but if it's not relevant to make that change, if you're not symbolising a change, then actually an effective brand will be one that's developed and enhanced. And there is often a danger that customers will come along and actually say, we just want to change things for the sake of it, or they're trying to have an impact on the business that perhaps isn't right, and that they're throwing a lot of stuff away that has strength and recognition, and it's understanding those things and why they're of importance to the business.
Yeah, I wonder if there was any examples we can think of. I mean, you say, but HSBC was an example of how it was done right.
Oh, what, with Midland Bank, you mean? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so anybody who doesn't remember that one, so there was Midland Bank, and it used to have a blue and yellow griffin as a sort of an identity, and HSBC took over Midland Bank. They had a transitional identity where it still was called Midland Bank, but they introduced the HSBC sort of diamond shape and the red and white, and it stayed as Midland Bank for a period of time. and then eventually they dropped the Midland Bank and just said HSBC, and everybody was fine with that. People didn't go, well, what happened to Midland Bank?
Well, I expect what happened during that is that the team behind it, massive organisation, were given an opportunity to come to terms with it as the brand evolved, as it were, which is kind of an ideal way. There have been examples where it haven't worked. Was it Cognis, the post office?
Yes, yeah. No, it wasn't called
Consignia.
that. Consignia, yes, that's it.
Consignia did it, and it failed utterly because I think it was a totally imposed brand rather than one that had been drawn from within the organisation, and perhaps even the organisation was used as a soundboard as to whether this was the right route to go. It was just imposed, and therefore it didn't work. And also it wasn't very well received by the public, because I think there was no, like with the Midland one, there was a sort of a gradual introduction of it. With the Consignia, it was just appeared one day.
And equally, if you're trying to if you're trying to show a significant change, then changing everything might make sense. So if you're trying to position yourself away from previous issues, then changing your brand makes a lot of sense, that you want to realign yourself. So, the question, if somebody's trying to do a rebrand, is always, what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to signify change, or just go with something that's an evolution? And I think that's a real important. We do get people coming on and say, well, we need to do a rebrand, and it's like, well, why?
What was the name of that? There was the name of a courier who've recently, they've become, and they were
Hermes.
Hermes.
Yes.
And that they made that brand change because Hermes developed a really bad reputation, and actually I think they had trouble with corruption.
Yes.
And so they did a rebrand to and I don't think they've got away from that.
No, and I think they're still in a bit of a transition, aren't they? Because you still see Hermes vans going around, so they obviously haven't yet completed that transition. But I suppose that some people will not make the connection between the two businesses, and they've no doubt got livery that's outdated.
Yeah.
And so that probably is effective, that you might not make the connection between the two businesses.
So try and wrap up this question. So what the question was, why brand? What's the point of a brand? And I suppose it's a symbolisation of a set of ways of doing things that help an organisation succeed. Whether it's a commercial organisation or a charity, or it doesn't really matter. It could be a school, but it's a symbolisation of the things that make it different and successful.
And symbolisation, I think, is really important, because we can all assume as business owners or individuals that the things that we value are the things that our customers are going to value. But of course we realise when you interact with different organisations that they have very different values.
Yeah.
And it's important in your brand to communicate those. Because you're looking to attract like-minded people. Tribes is another way of looking at brands, and it's very easy just to assume that we all share those values, and we might not. Some people might have a completely different objective, but you can use your brand to articulate that and attract like-minded people.
Yeah. So religious symbolism.
Yes.
I mean, it's religious zealots won't like this, but religious symbolism is a form of branding. Don't they say theoretically that pub signs were one of the first forms of branding?
Yeah, I think so.
But of course the term branding comes from branding cattle.
Yes.
So that's about ownership.
But it's about tribe, isn't it? It's about wanting to belong to a tribe. We all go out and buy particular clothing, let's say, that has a logo on it, and that's about wanting to be part of a tribe, wanting to be associated. My tattoos, it's this symbolism of standing out, wanting to be noticed. There's all sorts of things. Brand is everywhere.
So historically, tribal cultures would have tattoo symbolism to indicate what tribes they belong to, so they could differentiate between tribes. Perhaps it could be a point of conflict, but nevertheless, it's a way of understanding where you came from and what tribe you belong to. Yeah. Next question, please.